name is Daria Gesina. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Psychology, University of Sussex, and Ali is a PhD student at the School of Psychology, and she is jointly supervised by me and two clinical psychologists, Doctors Clara Strausser and Nick Gray. So they're not here today, but Ali will, I'm sure, will do her best to introduce the study that she has designed and leads now, which is a large multi-center study with the aim to identify predictors of the psychological treatment outcomes for people with common mental health problems. And the aim is to identify factors that are specific for older adults as compared to working age adults. Yeah, and Ali is now in her third year, and today she is going to give the update on the study, which has the name Propel.
Thank you. Great. So would you like to share your screen, Ali?
Can you see this okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So, hello everyone. My name's Ali. As Daya mentioned, I'm a PhD student at the University of Sussex, and today I'll be talking to you about one of the main studies of my PhD in the NHS Talking Therapy Service, IAPT. So we're looking to identify predictors of psychological treatment outcomes for common mental health problems such as depression and anxiety. So whilst my research is for my PhD is primarily focused on older adults, so over 65s, in this study we actually invited anyone over 18 with a view of comparing whether the predictors might differ between working age and older adults. To provide you a bit of background, so we do know that common mental health problems are quite common in older adults, with 20% of people experiencing these problems at some point. We also know that psychological treatment in IAPT is successful, with around 50% of treated patients moving into recovery, and some indication that this is even slightly better in older adults, but nevertheless, there's still room for improvement. By identifying factors that might actually help us predict whether someone benefits from treatment or not, this could help inform clinicians whether to adapt existing treatments or maybe even come up with new approaches where something doesn't work. So to begin of the PhD, I conducted a systematic literature review which identified 28 psychological treatment outcome predictors for older adults. But what this research has highlighted is that there's a high variability across studies. There were a lot of inconsistent findings, mixed findings, at times even contradictory. And overall, the research field seems to be quite exploratory. So a number of factors were only studied once and then never again. So with this in mind, we wanted to see if we can replicate some of these findings in the NHS Talking Therapy services. So with Propel, first of all, we want to identify what are the predictors of psychological treatment outcomes in IAPT, and then secondly, to see whether these factors might affect treatment outcomes differently for older adults compared to working age adults. So to give you a bit of an overview of the study, so the full protocol is published on ISR CTN, and you can follow the link here to read it in detail. But to summarize, the study was divided into two phases. So phase one was pre-treatment, where we recruited participants and collected 18 measures from our participants across different domains. So socio-demographic, some clinical measures, and some psychosocial measures. And today I will be talking to you about a snapshot of those. In total, we recruited just over 1,200 participants, of which 12% were older adults. And on the right here, you can see the geographical kind of spread across England of the number of, so we're 21 recruiting sites spread all over England. One thing to note here is that the proportion of older adults is a little bit lower than we had hoped to recruit to begin with. So whilst overall we exceeded our target, the older adult group was somewhat more difficult to recruit from. So as we went through the project, we actually went back to PPI groups to get some feedback on how we could improve the process. And we have made some changes to the recruitment process to boost the recruitment of older adults. But also, I think this figure has to be viewed in context with the proportion of older adults in the services in the first place, which is somewhere between 5 and 10%. So if anything, we have actually done slightly better than that, but it kind of indicates maybe some underrepresentation of that age group in the services. So we're now moving to phase 2. So this is the follow-up period. This is where we're now waiting for people to have their treatment and complete their treatment to obtain post-treatment measures from the IAP sites. So this is in progress, but because of the waiting time, somewhat quite long in the IAP services, we're looking to complete this by March next year. So here's a brief overview of the measures and the domains that we have asked people about. And as I mentioned, I'll be talking to you about a snapshot of those today. So first, looking at socio-demographic factors. You can see from this graph here that overall, unfortunately, the sample is not very ethnically diverse. Whilst there was some ethnic diversity in the working age adult group, actually in the older adult group, the participants were predominantly white. In terms of employment status, we expected to see a difference here, and I'm showing you here the top 3 categories by age group. So you can see in the older adult group, the majority of participants were retired, some were still employed. In the working age adult group, the majority were employed, but there was also quite a big proportion of unemployed. And it will be interesting to see whether this fact might impact treatment outcome. Then we've also asked participants about whether they were in receipt of benefits. So we saw that 25% of working age adults and 20% of older adults were in receipt of benefits. There was no difference between the age group from a statistical point. But yeah, again, it will be interesting to see whether this socioeconomic factor has an impact on treatment outcomes. In terms of education level, so previous research indicated that higher education level was associated with better treatment outcomes. And here we did see a difference between the two groups, with older adults having been more likely to have no formal qualification, and working age adults more likely to report higher education. Now moving on to some clinical factors. So I'll be talking to you about some mental health indicators, comorbidities, and perceived health. So in terms of mental health indicators, we asked participants about the duration of their current mental health problems. So the majority of participants reported having experienced their symptoms for more than 12 months. And there was no difference between the age groups. A similar picture with previous mental health problems. So this is looking at recurring problems. The majority of participants reported this to be the case, and that picture was similar across the age groups. Moving on to comorbidities, though, we do start to see some differences. So looking at physical health problems first, older adults were more likely to report physical health problems. On the flip side, though, looking at other mental health problems, working age adults seem to be more likely to report these. And here you can see a brief snapshot of the types of problems that were reported. So by and large, you can see that depression and generalized anxiety disorders were the largest groups for both age groups. There were some differences for particular conditions between the groups, with older adults having a slightly higher proportion in panic disorder, and working age adults slightly higher proportion of post-traumatic stress disorder. And then we also asked participants about how they perceive their own health. So this asked about their health in general, how they were able to carry out daily activities, pain ratings, and fatigue levels. The scores here ranged from 0 to 20, and the items are reverse scored. So higher scores actually mean lower perceived health. And we saw here that older adults were reporting lower perceived health. Okay, now moving on to psychosocial measures. So these are interesting because these are potentially modifiable factors that could be addressed during treatment, maybe with a view to bolster treatment outcomes. In particular, we're looking at self-compassion and loneliness. So self-compassion was measured with the Sussex Oxford Compassion Scales. Self-compassion has previously been linked to better mental health outcomes, but it has not been tested as a predictor of treatment outcomes previously. So here, the scores ranged from 20 to 100. And interestingly, older adults reported higher self-compassion scores compared to working age adults. So I look forward to seeing whether this also has an impact on treatment outcomes. And then moving on to loneliness. So this was measured with the UCLA loneliness scale and asked questions about how often the participants felt they lacked companionship, they felt left out, isolated from others, or lonely. The scores here ranged from 0 to 12. And I thought this was also quite a surprising finding. Here, actually, the working age adult group reported higher loneliness scores than the older adult group. This was somewhat surprising because of the reports of social isolation that older adults might experience, but maybe this is also an indication that even being surrounded by people might not necessarily mean that you feel connected to those around you. Okay, so this was a quick snapshot of the measures at baseline. In terms of next steps, as I mentioned, we are now waiting for our participants to start and complete their treatment to collect the post-treatment data points from the IAPT services. In the meantime, I'll be creating a detailed analysis plan and share this with PPI groups to obtain their feedback on the plan and the dissemination of findings, and then publish the analysis plan. So that leaves me to say thank you to my supervisors and to Sussex Partnership Trust, who've been really supportive of the study from the very beginning. And of course, to Mental Health Research UK for making all of this possible in the first place.